Hello, 8th graders, and welcome to your summary session with me here today. Today, we will be going over your chapter, The Tsunami. But before we do that, just a reminder for you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because you know champions are made here. Let's become a family of 50K. And you have your Unit Test League 2.0 going on, so stay tuned for more of these sessions. Grade 6, join in at 5, Grade 7 at 7, and Grade 8 at 8 p.m. Alright, now let's get to the summary and analysis of this chapter. But before we begin, we know that this is a very sad and depressing chapter because it talks about a natural disaster and how it impacted so many lives. And before we get to it, I would also like to share with you that, this tsunami that hit parts of Thailand, Andaman and Nicobar, and the Tamil Nadu coast in 2004. Well, I was in Chennai at that time, and I remember the impact that it had. Fortunately, me, my family, we were safe, even though there were a lot of earthquakes and generally a lot of chaos during that time. We weren't gravely affected by it. But I personally know a lot of people who were affected by it, and it's very important for us to always be thankful and grateful that we are safe and sound, and always to respect nature. Make sure that we don't do things that are bad for the environment, because they can result in a lot of damage and a lot of loss of life for a lot of people. All right, so with this sensitivity in mind, we will read about the different stories and the different incidents that happened related to the 2004 tsunami. And we're going to start with the stories from Andaman and Nicobar archipelago. Now, before we get started, I want you to know the meaning of this word, archipelago. It means a group of islands, okay? So, let me write down the names of the stories that we will be discussing so you remember them. So we are going to first discuss the story of Ignatius, and this happened in Katchal. Okay, Ignatius in Katchal. So what happened was that Ignatius was a manager of a cooperative society in Katchal, and his wife woke him up at 6 a.m. because she felt an earthquake. Okay, and when there's an earthquake, some of you might have experienced earthquakes. There are tremors. Tremors is the shaking that happens during an earthquake. So she felt tremors, and Ignatius perhaps thought it was just a regular earthquake. So we know in the story that before doing anything else, before leaving his house and going to a safe place, he makes sure to set his TV properly so that it doesn't fall and break. But because Ignatius and his family weren't aware that this was not just a regular earthquake and that a tsunami was coming, they weren't expecting it. They suddenly saw a wave rising, and the waves were so huge that they swept away his family, members of his family, basically his wife, his father-in-law, his brother-in-law, and two of his children. And the only children that managed to survive are the ones who were with Ignatius. So it is a very, very sad story. And I know as you must be reading it, you must be wondering, why are we reading such sad stories and of tragedies that happen to people? But just like positive stories are important, these stories are also important, especially when they are real, because we need to be aware of the pain and struggle that other people face so that we can become more empathetic individuals. All right, so that was the story of Ignatius. Then we move on to the story of Sanjeev. Here we have Sanjeev, who was a police officer, and he managed to save his wife and his baby from the tsunami. But because Sanjeev, perhaps because he was a police officer, was a courageous, brave person, he tried to rescue the guest house's cook's wife, and that is John's wife. And while doing so, he unfortunately, along with John's wife, got swept away by the waves. The third incident that we're going to learn about is that of Meghna. Sorry about that. Okay, we have Meghna, Now, Meghna is a 13-year-old girl, so she is someone who was of your age when this incident happened. And Meghna again was a sole survivor of her entire family. So she was swept away by the waves along with her parents, but then she found a wooden door to latch onto, which ended up saving her life because she floated in the sea on that wooden plank for 2 whole days. And then, even though she was saved, she lost all of her family, and to be floating in the sea with no help for 2 days is a very traumatizing experience. Traumatizing means something that has had such a negative impact on you that even remembering it is very difficult for you to handle. So she was traumatized by this, dazed by this, and in fact, she even saw rescue helicopters go above her twice, but they couldn't spot her. So that's why it took a longer time for the rescue operatives to save Meghna. A similar story is of Almas Javed. Okay, now Almas Javed is also someone close to your age, a 10-year-old girl, and she her father actually noticed that the seawater was receding, and as the seawater was receding, he realized that this is a sign of a tsunami coming. And because of that, he warned everyone to take shelter. And because you cannot be prepared for such a situation beforehand, there was a lot of chaos in her family, during which her grandfather actually got injured, and then uh, a huge wave came and Almas's grandfather was washed away. Slowly, her entire family was swept away. Almas managed to climb on a wooden log and she fainted on the log. And then, when she regained her consciousness, she found herself in a hospital in Kamorta. So, the impact that this entire incident had on her made her not want to think about it or talk about it again and again. So both Meghna and Almas, rightfully so, were extremely traumatized by this experience. Very, very unfortunate, extremely sad to have to go through something like this. Then we have the stories from Thailand. Okay, that is part 2 of the chapter. Now, this story is on a more positive side because it tells us about presence of mind. It tells us about good decisions that were taken at the right time. And the protagonist of this story is Tilly Smith. Tilly Smith was a British schoolgirl, and she was with her family in Phuket in Thailand celebrating Christmas. And on 26 December 2004, while they were at the beach, she noticed something odd happening in the sea. She saw that the sea waves were slowly rising and there was foam that was beginning to form, and she also saw whirlpools. Okay, and everybody else at the beach, they weren't too concerned about this, but Tilly remembered something that she had learnt in school and suddenly realized that the signs that she see are actually signs of a tsunami coming. So Tilly Smith at this point became hysterical. Hysterical means when your emotions become extremely uncontrolled, okay, and then you're giving all sorts of reactions and you're displaying really odd behavior because you cannot get hold of your emotions. So Tilly became hysterical and tried to convince everyone to go away from the beach because she had learned from a geography teacher that what's happening in the sea right now is a sign of a tsunami. Thankfully, her parents did not think that, Tilly is just a child and she doesn't know what she's talking about. They noticed that because she's behaving in such a way, something must be wrong and they need to listen to her. And they left the beach and went back to their hotel along with a lot of other people at the beach. Thankfully, their hotel could resist a few waves of the tsunami, because as soon as they reached there, the tsunami hit. They made it out right in time and were thankfully saved from what could have been, or would have definitely been, a situation that would have ended all of their lives. Okay? So, quick thinking, remembering what she learned in school, and her parents who got convinced, all these reasons led to Tilly Smith's and a lot of other people's lives being saved during the tsunami. All right, the next story that we're going to go over is not much of a story, more of an analysis of what happened, the sixth sense of animals in identifying disastrous natural calamities. So it was observed, especially the Yala National Park. Where is this? This is in Sri Lanka. That the day the tsunami hit, 60 people, 60 visitors died, but barely any animal carcasses were found. I think only 2 animal carcasses were found. Carcass is a dead body. And in general, around 150,000 people lost their lives in a dozen of countries, but in comparison, only very few animals actually died. And another anecdote, another story that a person shared was a Sri Lankan gentleman who lived close to Gale coast said that he used to take his 2 walks out on a walk on the beach every day. But the day that the tsunami was going to hit, they were very reluctant to go on a walk. They did not want to go, and that saved their lives. Okay, and even in the national park, it was observed that elephants were running away from the beach, and this was an hour before the tsunami struck. So, all of this is evidence that maybe these animals are able to predict that something like a tsunami is going to hit, something like an earthquake is going to come. And there are 2 theories for this. One is that they have a sixth sense, that they just know this information. Another is related to their hearing. We already know that animals have a more acute sense of hearing than human beings. That means they can hear higher frequencies, a lot higher than the human range and a lot lower than the human range as well. So maybe the fact that they can hear very low frequencies gives them an indication that something is happening, maybe the movement of the earth, and that helps them predict the tremors of an earthquake. These are all, I mean, this theory is rooted in science. It's related to the hearing. The sixth sense, not so much. It's just something that people believe that animals might possess a sixth sense that lets them know in advance when these things are happening. And all of these stories are evidence of that. With this, we have reached the end of the chapter. Just a little added information. You might have heard about people with epilepsy. They usually have dogs with them that are able to predict when their fit is about to come. So, if you get questions that ask you about your opinion on whether animals have a sixth sense or which theory you identify with more, you can keep all of these added bits of information in mind while forming your opinion. And again, I know these are very sad, very depressing stories. We need to read them sensitively, and obviously our heart goes out to all the people who suffered and continue to suffer, because there are so many other natural disasters happening in the world. So just remember to be kind, to be empathetic, and to always be grateful that you and your family are safe and sound. And Tilly Smith's story really tells us that education and knowledge never goes to waste. So do let me know if some piece of information that you learned about in school or from a teacher or from someone else has helped you out in another situation. That would make for a really interesting story, and I would really love to know. So do drop that in the comments section. Stay tuned, because we are going to answer questions from this chapter in the next session.